quitting on your dreams is personal bankruptcy. This is a quote that has influenced me like none other. Like many of you out here, I too am a dreamer who's a little satkela, like my friends say. So before getting here, I Googled the meaning of this word satkela, and Google says, a crazy person who talks of nonsensical tasks that are not feasible to perform. Well, that's who I am truly. Given my predisposition to higher levels of risk-taking, early on, I was drawn to the field of adventure and outdoors. From being a kid adventurer at 7 to an adventure trip leader at 15, an off-road jeeper at 26, to an extreme terrain driver at 30, the first woman to drive Delhi to London at 34, and the first Indian to drive to the pole of cold at 35, what has remained constant within me is an inherent need to push myself beyond boundaries, both within and outside. And I believe that most of us have dreams, but it's only some of us who choose to pursue them, and very few amongst us who manage to realize them. Let's look at this a little closely. Why is it becoming from most of us to some of us to very few amongst us? A couple of key points to consider here. What stops people from dreaming? What makes people quit on their dreams? Or the other way of saying it is, what is that satkela factor that people have who manage to realize their dreams? What is that make or break factor that helps in the nth moment? In my opinion, the answers to all these questions are pegged around the word fear. Fear of anything. Loss, failure, abandonment, bankruptcy, etc. To begin with, a fear to dream. What will people think? Can I even afford to? Not sure. Blah, blah. Let's assume you've gotten past this stage and you have started pursuing a dream you hold. In my case, given my field of the outdoors and every single dream journey, when I start sharing details, it doesn't go down too well with family. So my father's first response always is, remember, you have children back home who are dependent on you. And he stops, as sweet as he is. First couple of questions asked always are, is it safe? Aren't you scared? Why do you want to risk it? Bottom line being fear. Fear of the unknown, the what-if kind of fear. And I have begun to believe that it is this fear that stands between success and failure when you pursue a dream. So today I stand before you to share with you some of the most frightening situations in my life when fear has stood between realizing or quitting on a dream that I hold. It is about, I'd like you to observe that X factor that it takes, that I was talking about initially, that stands between success and failure, because I believe that is what finally matters when you pursue a dream. I was 16, and in those days, you could only become doctors or engineers. But early on, I had figured out that I want a career in the outdoors. So when I told my family this, all hell broke loose, as expected, and I was asked to either conform or leave home. Guess what? I walked out. I dropped out of school. I was 4 months away from my 12th exam. I started working as a trek leader in an adventure organization in Bangalore. Was I scared at that point? Of course I was. Scared for my physical safety, scared that I'll be exploited, scared that I'll be judged. Most importantly, scared because I did not know whether I'll succeed or fail. When I think back what it took to get over that situation, I think it was a certain bullish push. You know, sometimes fear requires that kind of unwavering conviction to get past a particular situation. Did this come with consequences? Yes, it did. Tags get attached instantly. School dropout, vagabond, nomad, more recently, irresponsible mother. The onus to succeed ends up being purely on you. You either make it or you break. Another instance that comes to my mind around that time, I was on a solo exploratory recce. I used to lead treks in the Western Ghats those days. So this was in the Sharavati Valley. I had taken this local villager as a trail guide. So after about 2 hours of walking, we came up to this grassland-like ridge. Beneath, there's a huge forested valley for a couple kilometers. On the other side, similar grassland-like bald hills. So we started descending towards the valley. This guy had a sickle in one hand, was using it to chop off stuff on the way. He comes close to me and he says, "Let's fly a rocket." I didn't get it. But when I did, my face turned blue. He was talking about raping me. He held my hands, tried to overpower me. There was no time but to react rapidly in that situation, no time to freeze. What it took at that point was mustering every bit of strength that I had, all the mental notes I had made of that area, most importantly, a raw will to survive. I have to get past this. I did all of that, kicked, wrestled, and I ran into the forest, then reached the other side. So exhausted, was crying, was in this really dilapidated state, sitting alone there at the edge of the forest. And guess who I met? I met a person within. For the first time, I had to calm myself down, and I started addressing myself as Nidhi. So there was this scared and tired and dilapidated and Nidhi, and then there was this buddy Nidhi who was within. And we started having this conversation. There was nothing else that I could do in that situation. And guess what? I made a choice at that point. 20 days later, I went back on the same trail, leading a team of people. And that's a choice I made, and I'm so glad I did that, with the only intention of wanting to replace those sick memories with much stronger ones. And these choices have brought in an unparalleled sense of self-belief. And it's made me the person I am over the years. How many of you have driven out to Lahore and Spiti? Great. Few hands out there. So this was in 2012. At 4 o'clock, I was driving Kaza to Manali. At 4 o'clock in the early evening, I come across this stream that's flowing. It's raging. I mean, literally murky water, ice cold over the road, and it's draining into this river in the valley, literally like a cliff drain on the sharp curve. You can't see that here, but in this picture, in fact, this was the only thing I could find of that situation. So now, what were the odds? I had a teammate who was showing advanced signs of AMS, acute mountain sickness. I had to get to Manali for medical attention. Going back to Kaza was not a choice. And anybody who's driven in the mountains, like the bunch of you who raised your hands, would know that you want to cross these streams before noon. It's common sense when you drive in the mountains, because the water volume is much lesser. And post-noon, thanks to glacial melt, the water volume increases considerably. But there I was at 4 p.m. Did not quite have a choice. So what did I do? I stepped out of the car. I saw 3 vehicles ahead. There were a bunch of people standing at the edge of the water, debating, discussing whether to cross, not to cross, it's too heavy, the flow, blah, blah. Vehicle could have gotten washed off in seconds had we gotten stuck. I walked straight, not talking to anybody, walked across the water, crossed it on foot, realized the water is slightly above my knee, made note of some big stones where the tire can get stuck, walked straight back, almost like tunnel vision, There was no interacting with anybody. It was silencing all that chaos that was happening around. Have you ever felt that? It's very similar to if you're cooking and there are 10 people guiding you on what to do, but you know what is to be done in that situation, then you continue to do what you need to do, right? So that's what I did. So came back to the vehicle, started revving the engine, pressing the accelerator to generate some bit of torque. So for those of you who drive in Bangalore traffic, you would relate that when there is a little bit of space between 2 vehicles, you want to go zoop to be able to cover that space and occupy that space so that you've gone a little further ahead. So that's what torque does. So I needed that kind of a fillip as I crossed the Nala. Once I took off, the car flew. For the next 5 to 8 seconds, I think my brain was numb. Went on to the other side. It took nearly about 10 odd minutes to cool down because your heart rate is so elevated, so much adrenaline in the body, face is flushed. Now to onlookers, this might have seemed as an act of raw courage, you know, and bravery and bravado. But let me tell you, it wasn't just that. It was a lot more than that. It was silencing all the chaos that was happening around. It was about a rough plan in your head where the wheels would be placed. The consequences were real. It was death had the vehicle gotten stuck. It was a certain assessment of risk and consequence. And then it was that numbing, necessary dive when you go head down and you say, I have to get across, I have to get across. So sometimes fear cannot just be, I've realized over the years, sometimes it's not just about, you know, foolishly just jumping in, because there's a certain backstory to it that I just shared with you, right? You need to know where to place those wheels. So having heard me so far, you might be tempted to believe that my life has always remained on track and focused and whatnot. That's not so. I lost myself along the way. Married, 2 children, job to sustain, to make ends meet. I started, a couple of years ago, I started referring to myself like in past tense. I would say, so I was this person, you know, would look at those pictures and say, I would do these hikes and, you know, it used to be this tough. And I said, hello, you're the same person. Why is this in past tense? I literally had to check myself, and that's when Delhi, London started happening. It was a very personal journey. It was about reconnecting with that steely determination that I thought I always had. Did it come with challenges? Yes, it did. Kept me away from my family. Family suffered financially. Could raise very little money. I wasn't working for those months. Kept me away from my children. But I knew it was temporary, and most importantly, I think what made me take that jump was about the fact that if I'm not a happy and content person from within, how am I going to bring up happy and content children? And that's the reason I said, we go ahead. That's Delhi, London. That's the route for you. The next instance I want to share with you is from while on the Delhi-London drive. This was in Uzbekistan. So I was driving from Andijan to Tashkent, and I was alone in the car. And by the way, for the record, I had 2 teammates as well on the Delhi-London drive, though I was the only driver. But for some circumstances, they weren't here in this section. It was around mid-afternoon, and I was driving on the rightmost lane, though. You drive right, right? So that's the slowest. So this car, something like a sedan, it comes, it kind of touches me slightly, comes and parks itself in front. And I had to stop. And before I knew it, these 5 men start charging towards my car. Instinctively, I kind of, do that central lock, but I had to roll down the windows to figure out what. They started accusing me. They said, you crashed into our car, which was completely stupid even from a hypothesis point of view. They wanted money. They wanted $1,000. They were all drunk, completely drunk. I said, I don't have money, which I really did not because I would not carry cash. Started kicking the car, got aggressive, started abusing. And there I was inside, I guess, involuntarily tears came down and whatnot. How mortified I was. There were 5 of them and I was alone. So this guy who was most drunk, he picks up this huge rock and he comes in front of me. I'm still sitting in the driver's seat. And he says, I'm going to fling this on your windscreen if you don't give the money. And something within me at that point snapped. And I said, well, if he does that, it's going to cost me a bomb to fix it anyways. Stepped out of the car, again, tunnel vision, walked straight up to him. I don't know where this came from. Walked straight up to him in his face and said, you want to throw the stone? Go ahead. You want to do something to me? Do it. And you will not believe what happened after that. 10 minutes, they were gone. They just did not know how to react to that reaction. 10 minutes, they were all gone. And that's the day I realized that in some situations, well, you have to face it straight up. It's in your face, and that's how fear is faced sometimes. It worked for me in that situation, on that day, at that point. I'm not saying this is a universal rule. The next one is the most deadliest of them all. This was on the Siberian drive. It was intense from the word go. 5,080 kilometers, in northwestern Siberia, on the road of bones, in the peak of winter, that too solo. I saw a version of me which I did not know even existed, honestly. This was that day that I was driving from Susuman to Magadan. Magadan is the end of the road of bones. So it was 630 kilometers. It took for eternity. That whole journey took about 18 hours finally. I was exhausted. After about 12 odd hours, I think that's one day, if I were to pinpoint in life, I came very, very, very close to giving up. That was the day the snowfall hadn't let up since morning. It had been snowing very hard. And after 12 hours, because you're concentrating so hard on the ice roads, you're holding the steering so tight because the wheels are so sensitive to every single, little stone that exists, and you don't want it skidding. With all that fatigue, I think mentally, emotionally, I was done by then, and I started crying. I cried for a bit. And then the tears dried up, and it turned to anger that day. Anger that, damn it, why me? Why am I in this situation? Why couldn't have it been somebody else? Then it turned to desperation. I want to see the children again. I don't want to die here. It would have taken less than an hour to freeze to death had I given up. I said, that didn't work. Okay, God, what, aren't you seeing all of this? All this emotional roller coaster, I had covered just 50 kilometers. That's it. I still had a good 250 to go to Magadan. And this was around 6, 7 in the evening. So you know how I covered the next 250 plus? The road looked like this. There were no tracks even. And it was snowing through and through. So where do you place the wheels? There's soft snow on either side of the track. So which is what you're gauging, which is what brings down the speed, and it kind of tires you out. The next thing I did, the next 250 kilometers, I started recounting from childhood up until then, every single instance when I could have given up but had not. And that buddy within would make sense and say, well, you could do it then, why not now? Instance after instance. Fear of death, is something else. It's the deadliest because it feeds off an acute sense of incapacity. To tackle that, you muster everything in your toolbox, emotional toolbox. I did. Some of the situations I've shared with you, Uzbekistan, leaving home, Sharavati, then there was one in Baralacha, and many, many more such. In every instance, I drew strength from each of these that night. Finally, I reached Magadan at 2 in the morning. But what reaching Magadan did for me is going to keep me going for the rest of my life. It again restored that sense of self. I'm going to draw from that experience for many, many, many years to come. In so many miles driven, kilometers walked, like you must have noticed, there were many, many points when I could have given up, but I chose not to. And that's the X that I'm talking about. I hope this helps you reflect and build that X factor for yourself, that Satkela factor, which is about overcoming fear, the mental muscle that it takes to overcome fear as you go about chasing your dreams. Wishing you the best. Thank you.